A very warm welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Priyanka Mathur. Professor Mathur is a political scientist by training, and she's a professor and researcher by profession. She was born, and since this is a course on migration studies, and I have a very tempting bio of hers written in the migration language. So, Professor Mathur was born to a North Indian father and a West Indian Gujarati mother. She grew up in a multicultural and multilingual home in the East Indian city of Kolkata, then Calcutta, where she gained her undergraduate studies, undergraduate degree in political science at Jadavpur University, after which she moved to Delhi and she studied at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, where she did her master's, MPhil, and PhD in political science at the Center for Law and Governance. Then a Commonwealth scholarship took her to Oxford in the UK, where she spent a year doing a second master's specifically related to the topic on which she's going to speak on today. Professor Mathur has worked in several non-government research organizations in India, such as the Multiple Action Research Group, the Center for Development and Human Rights, and the Institute for Human Development in New Delhi. Then life took her to South India, to Bangalore, where she taught first as an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science at St. Joseph College, where she was also the PG coordinator. Currently, she is head and professor at the Center for Research in Social Sciences and Education at Jain University, Bangalore. Professor Mathur's worked in projects sponsored by the World Bank and UNHCR and also conducted many training workshops in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. She's a member of the editorial board of Refugee Law Reader and has served as an office bearer of the member of the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration and has also been a founding member of the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. Her academic and research work has been published in various national and international journals. She also writes policy op-eds regularly, and her research areas are broadly in development administration, public administration, political theory, modern political thinkers, political analysis, and research methods, among others. It's really a pleasure to have you here, Professor Priyanka Mathur, and we are really looking forward to your talk on refugees, migrants, and the nation state. Uh, Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amrita, for the very kind introduction and for having me here today. Uh, Today, I'm going to be speaking on a very important topic, which I believe everybody should be knowing a little bit about. The world as we see today stands on two time bombs which have literally burst on our faces. One is climate change, and the other is migration. And one out of four or five people today are voting with their feet. They're moving, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. So let's talk about refugees, migrants, and the nation state. And I look at it through the lens of what I call the insider outsider paradox. Well, the future of the migrant, as Professor Nija Jayal and Professor Roy had said, is that it lies at the intersection of the nation state and its citizens and the dialectic of the nation state and its citizens. And that is the crisis of citizenship, because when citizens get very picky and particular about who's in or who's out, or what rights do they have, and therefore what rights should those who are coming from outside have or should not have, that is what determines the future of the migrant. But let's step a little back and ask ourselves, how does this nation state therefore determine who its citizens are? That's the fundamental question, right? Who are its citizens? Who fall out of the boundaries of a nation state? And who are kept out of it purposively? Let's look at this picture. What do you see? Well, this picture on top first shows you that very hard big wall as the border between USA and Mexico. And at the bottom picture, are you seeing a wall? We aren't, right? Well, that's the border between Holland and Belgium in a little cafe somewhere in Europe where you are actually stepping over this international boundary. So, the whole concept of borders, what does that personify? What does that mean? In forced migration studies, we say that borders define the validity and the utility of a nation state. As Professor Ranabir Samaddar had said, drawing borders, in fact, marks territories. And when nation states do that, it fixes what we call the illegality of migration. Professor B.S. Chimney had in fact taken this a step further and said this all obsession with borders and drawing borders and marking territories leads to the nation state's fixation with the term that he called borderosis. Now, all of this, what Samaddar and Chimney both say, where does this stand today in the global economy of a borderless world, where you and I are speaking to one another just across a screen? Amrita and I are talking to one another from Bangalore and Hyderabad. We are way beyond the 6 degrees of separation. We are just a few seconds away from each other, right? Do we today really think of borders in the manner in which people earlier used to think of borders? Is one question that we need to ask ourselves. Well, this has often been a trademark and, a kind of a logo for those who are asking for a borderless world. No borders, no nations, no flags, no patriots. Is that really possible? In 2025 today, we are living in a world where there are so many wars happening. And this somewhere seems like a la la land and a, kind of a utopia, doesn't it? Let's talk about three variables first: nation state, membership, and migration. So, those who are inside the borders of a nation state, we define them as the legitimate members, and those who are outside these borders are not the citizens. So, when migrants come in, whether voluntarily or forced, these migrants definitely demand rights. The rights that they demand on the soil where they're standing, that challenges the exclusive rights that till then citizens of that soil had. It's therefore not surprising that over the last couple of decades, we've seen nation states drawing their own borders tighter and closer. This lateral increase, the more the nation states draw its borders closer and tighter, we see a lateral increase in the domain of the rights of the migrants. Well, it's our job to address, acknowledge, and throw the spotlight on these very tensions. Let me first begin by talking a little bit about concepts, definitions. So, who is a refugee? The term refugee, the legal definition of the term refugee, is given to us in Article 1 of the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees, given to us by the United Nations. And it says that a refugee is anyone who flees their home country due to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, right? The 5 grounds of persecution, which the classic UN definition gives us. And those are the grounds on which the UNHCR and other organizations, they determine refugee status, that those are the legal dimensions through which the lens is considered. Let's go a little deeper. Let's zoom into this definition that I just ranted out to you, right? You need to be first outside the country of his or her nationality. So, if I'm an Indian and I need to be positioned, I need to be definitely in a country outside the borders of India to start thinking that I want to demand refugee status. The Myanmaris who are fleeing from Myanmar and coming into India, right? The refugees who are fleeing Afghanistan and pouring into Pakistan. The people who are fleeing war in Ukraine and Russia and pouring out into the other countries, neighboring countries. The people who are fleeing Syria. I'll keep Gaza for another later discussion. Let's park that on the side for the moment, right? So, a person who is therefore outside the country of his or her nationality, and you cannot return to it. Now, if you're a Bangladeshi migrant, your country is right now not at war. It was in 1971, no more. But you're coming to India for better work. And if you want, you can always go back. Then you're not a refugee, right? For being a refugee, you need to clear this. You need to show that you cannot return to it for a fear of persecution. You're scared for your life. There are reasons for which make you believe that you are going to be persecuted. And what could those reasons be? That persecution could be on the grounds of race, it could be on the grounds of religion, on your nationality, because you belong to a particular social group or a political, or you have a particular political opinion. And it's not just a fear which is in your head or it's happening in your neighbor's house and not with you. You need to prove that fear as a well founded fear. And then only do you, kind of clear the test to get the tag of a refugee. Now, I'm talking very clinically, legally here. So look at this picture. What do you see from the top shot? Too many people, way too many people on a boat in the waters. There was a very tragic saying which said that a parent would only put a child on a boat like this when the waters are more safe than the land, right? We know that the Mediterranean Sea, we know that the Indian Ocean, they are considered as cemeteries, the watery graves of so many of these boatloads of refugees who are fleeing from one place to another and who perhaps never make it to the other shore. Now, contrary to the refugee is another category whom we called a migrant. Remember, the word choice matters. There is actually no universally accepted definition, but we do have some coming up now. Well, migration is a population movement encompassing any kind of movement of people, whatever its length. The United Nations, in fact, defines the migrant as an individual who has resided in a foreign country for more than 1 year. According to the UNESCO Migration Glossary, the term migrant can be understood as any person who lives temporarily or permanently in a country where he or she was not born and has acquired some significant social ties of the country. Now, the United States government, on the other hand, says the US Bureau of the Census collects data on the number of persons who change their usual residence during a 12-month period. If the change is within the same country, the person is a mover, right? If to another country, then the person is a migrant, right? If you are at within the same country, then you are a mover. And if you are moving to another country, then it is a migrant. Now, definitely, the whole understanding nation state, citizens, and aliens, right? Now, that is something that considers this whole dynamics of refugees also and citizens also. Because when we are bringing in the whole idea of who a citizen is and who a migrant is, you'll be surprised to hear that, many legal documents today in various countries define a migrant as an alien. No, we are not talking of the Ritik movie Jadoo or the E.T. Movie, but the word alien is given the category, the tag to a human being who's actually also a migrant. So when we start bringing in these conversations into this dialectic between a nation state and a citizen, the distinction happens between a national and a stranger. And so the migrant then starts being labeled differently. There are categories of indifferent outsiders, namely aliens or foreigners. We also give them the tag that they are a dangerous category of illegal aliens or migrants. And as Professor Chimney said, maybe a nation state needs these aliens and outsiders. But just think about it, reflect on it for a moment. Would, as a human being, would you like to be called that, right? Well, the ethics in forced migration studies and the morality in forced migration studies, they tell us that we should never label a human being an alien, and a human being cannot be illegal, right? We see the term being used so loosely: illegal migrant, illegal immigrant. The process of movement can be illegal, but a human being cannot be ever illegal. Similarly, here is a little boy protesting and telling you, I am not an alien. We have seen this word, however, being repeatedly being used. And we saw, of course, right in the beginning when during Hitler's reign, when there were refugees, people running away from Nazi rule, we saw newspaper headlines calling them alien migrants. Now comes another category, which we call statelessness. I said let's park Gaza for another little later discussion. Well, that's when I pluck Gaza and bring it back to the center now. We looked at refugees, we looked at migrants, let's look at stateless persons. Stateless persons are individuals who are not recognized as nationals or citizens by any country under the operation of its laws. According to the 1954 UN Convention relating to the status of stateless persons, and this is the definition given to us in international law, a stateless person is defined as, and I quote, a person who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. That means you do not have a country to call your home. There's no country of your nationality that you can go back to. And that's what happened to the Palestinians, right? Now, there are two key UN treaties that protect the stateless persons: the 1954 Convention related to the status of stateless persons, which defines their rights and status. And we had the 1961 Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness that aims to prevent and reduce statelessness globally. The UNHCR, in fact, is the organization that leads the global efforts to identify, protect, and resolve the cases of statelessness. We know that statelessness can arise from several legal, political, and social factors, such as gaps or conflicts in nationality laws. When different countries' citizenship laws don't align, that is, when one grants citizenship by birth and another by descent. It can also happen because of state succession. When new states are created or borders change, some people are left without recognized nationality. Discrimination. When we have discrimination on grounds of race, ethnicity, religion, or gender, for example, certain groups which are excluded from citizenship. When there are administrative or bureaucratic barriers, lack of birth registration or identity documents. When there is renunciation or loss of citizenship without acquiring another nationality, all these reasons lead to people becoming stateless. In recent memory, 1982, Myanmar made a change in its constitution and said that the group of people who are called Rohingyas are no longer the citizens of the land. And that's when the Rohingyas overnight became stateless. This is a little bit of a dated figure, but it gives you a rough idea. In India, you can have around 207,408 people of concern who are refugees. And if you look at by country of origin, the largest, of course, were the Tibetans. Then we have the Sri Lankans. These are the two categories of groups of refugees who have been assisted by the government of India. And the countries of origin who are not looked after by the government of India, the UNHCR steps in to take care of them, which are the people coming in from Myanmar, Afghanistan, Somalia, and others. Let's take a moment to just look at this classic, very tragic black and white picture in front of us. Well, I'm sure if I had a live audience here today and I would ask you, you would all say, and you will remember, this is 1947. This is partition. This was the biggest, largest movement of people across one single international boundary. People crossing over from India to Pakistan, two new states that were created with the British colonial rule leaving those two countries. And so Hindus from one side, from Indians from the Pakistan side going over to India, and Muslims from Pakistan, from the Hindu side, going over to Pakistan. That was the largest recorded movement in South Asia of human beings crossing over one international boundary. It also led to a lot of riots and lot of tragic loss of life. India as a country has traditionally believed in the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbam, that is, the world is my family. India has not been a signatory to the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. We are a non signatory country, and the status of refugees in India is thus governed mainly by political and administrative decisions. Right now, just very recently, we have had an asylum bill being passed by the parliament, and we will see as to how this immigration and asylum bill is going to work out and take care of the rights of the people. But from 1950 to 2025, refugees in India have lived in a legal vacuum, so as to say. Most of them have lived in dire human rights conditions, other than maybe just the Tibetan group, which have been the most pampered group. Refugees have not had a legal space within which they could claim for their rights. The UNHCR, it has two offices in India, in New Delhi and in Chennai. It conducts registration and refugee status determination, that is the RSD process. But other than that, the condition and the legal status of refugees is ad hoc, and it depends on who's in power at what point of time, what's the bilateral foreign policy and relations. And so decisions on refugees are mostly politically expedient. We did a study of the coping strategies of urban refugees in Delhi, that's the capital city in India. And we particularly looked at groups which, lived in Delhi city. We know that refugees who live in urban places, urban refugees, they in fact, our study showed us that they overcome their hardship through determination and they demonstrate immense resilience. But that cannot deny the fact that there has been a discrimination and different refugee groups have received differential treatment on Indian soil. Let's look at Afghan refugees in India. Well, it's been decades now that we've had Afghan refugees coming in India. In a city like Delhi, there are certain colonies like Panchsheel and Saket and around those areas where we've had the Afghan refugee colonies. But it's not that they have been particularly given any extra rights by the Indian government, because they have mostly been the merchant class and they kind of, through their work, they move, okay? They go ahead. Now, here is a group of refugees. We have the Afghan refugees. You can see the women here working, and the women sit and they have made their own workshops and they have done their sewing studios. They run their little businesses, and that's how they move around in Delhi. Some pictures from our study. Definitely, Somali refugees in Delhi have suffered. They have faced a lot of racial discrimination. They continue to face this. It's a very small group numerically. But compared to Tibetans and Afghans in New Delhi, they have been discriminated and they have been, not given that same kind of preferential treatment. Then we've had the refugees from Myanmar. We've had the CHRO office, we have a Burma Center in Delhi, the Chin Human Rights Organization. There are a lot of refugees who are coming in from Burma, that is Myanmar right now, and living in Delhi, and they get a lot of support from the UNHCR also. Some pictures. I just want to now finally drop the spotlight on a group which has been known in the world as the most persecuted group. And in India, too, we have a small percentage of refugees who are the Rohingya refugees. They have been living in various parts of India. But our center, we did a study in Hyderabad city and looked at the living conditions of Rohingya refugees in Hyderabad from an ethnographic and anthropological and human rights perspective, particularly through the lens of their crisis of assimilation. In fact, let's remember that the Rohingyas do not have Myanmar as a country to call their own, and technically they are stateless persons, because statelessness refers to this legal condition in which a person is deprived of the nationality or citizenship of any country. Article 1 of the 1954 Convention relating to the status of stateless persons says that a stateless person is one who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. Well, that's why we give you the map here. Around 25,000 Rohingya Muslims have taken shelter in India, but not all of them are in government refugee camps. Around nearly 2,000, 1,755 are in Andhra Pradesh, mostly Hyderabad. Basic amenities such as food, clean water, medicines, and clothes still eludes them. And according to police records, 1,679 Rohingya refugees living in 10 different parts of Hyderabad. And these are the names of the various camps that are there outside, just on the suburbs of the city where they live. Mohammed Shakir gave us a very heartbreaking testimony talking about how they had to travel through many countries to come till Hyderabad. Hyderabad has been the city because of its more of a Muslim identity, and Rohingyas being Muslim, they feel that they have a better chance of assimilated in the city there. But they took the arduous task of taking the path of coming through the sea, then getting into Bangladesh, then coming into West Bengal, and then taking the journey down all the way down to the city of Hyderabad. For most Rohingyas, when you speak to them in Hyderabad, they say Hyderabad is Muslim friendly and it will welcome them. We've had the Confederation of Voluntary Associations, COA, which is helping them. And the United Nations, in fact, estimates that there are 11,000 Rohingyas in India since 2012. We again had another heartrending story given to us by Rahman and his family in Kiskanabad, who speak about how their families were separated and just two of them managed to make it to Hyderabad, but they lost the remaining members in the journey to Hyderabad. There have been many newspaper articles that talks about them, of Rohingya Muslims who have escaped violence in Myanmar, come to Hyderabad for livelihood. But the fact is that they have issues. Their failure to learn Urdu and Telugu languages makes it difficult for them to land jobs. Nearly 1,500 Rohingyas have settled down in this city. You can see them in these areas, the various areas that I mentioned here, and many NGOs, particularly the countries who are Muslim and who have their consulates in the city, they come out to help them. The Rohingya refugees in India have, of course, the whole identity crisis. They only are able to get any identification documentation through the UNHCR when the UNHCR gives them their cards. But recently, we have seen in the last 1 year, particularly, and this year during the summer, a lot of Rohingya refugees being deported from India despite having even UNHCR documentation. They survive only on community and international support. Their biggest barriers are language and cultural barriers, and how to feed their family members, the search for livelihood. It's usually daily jobs that they do, whatever little bit of money that they get per day that they're able to kind of feed their family members in the camps where they live. Dire living conditions, health facilities, various human rights issues facing them in these camps. These are some of our own pictures from our study. Of course, women and children have their own stories. We did focus group discussions with just the women and children. Women refugees, particularly, face the double burden. They are silenced first, not just because they're refugees, but also because they are women. And they also talk of horrific stories of police persecution. Finally, therefore, I would like to end with this, that the criminalization of the Rohingyas is thus a reality in India. As Hannah Arendt had foretold us years ago, the stateless person without right to residence and without the right to work had, of course, constantly to transgress the law. He was liable to jail sentences without ever committing a crime. More than that, the entire hierarchy of values which pertain in civilized countries was reversed in his case. Since he was the anomaly for whom the general law did not provide, it was better for him to become an anomaly for which it did provide, that of the criminal. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Priyanka, for your very, very thorough and comprehensive lecture. And not only did you take us through the concepts and definitions along with various laws and treaties in migration and refugee research, you also sort of did it better with a very humane perspective, which was anchored in social justice, global social justice. So, thanks so much for that. And more specifically, your own work, the fact that you shared your own work vis-a-vis the general discourse on migration is something which I think the students will find very helpful. So if I could ask you a question, could you tell us a little bit more, on the one hand, we have all of these treaties and so on. On the other hand, we know that nation states are becoming stronger, harder in this whole, a framework of sort of, methodological nationalism. So, in such a context that we are at globally right now, what is it that, in what is it that can be useful or helpful from not only a policy perspective, but also if you want to shift our gaze to the refugees themselves, how can the laws help them better as nation states become so hard in their views?
That's a very, very pertinent question today, particularly in 2025, when we are seeing the state of Gaza, we are seeing Ukraine, we are seeing Syria, and of course, even India, because our center also just recently completed an international study. We looked at the state of Myanmarese refugees coming into the northeastern states of India. Legally, they are often left with nothing. And while at the world, the UNHCR is doing a lot, we know that the UN itself has kind of thrown up its hands in air because it has no funds. And we have the big countries not pulling out of funding to the refugees. Uh, we need to go back to the fundamental premise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it talks about the right to life and human dignity of every human person. So we know that laws will always have their pros and cons. Laws will begin and end somewhere. Laws may exist, may not exist. At the end of the day, the refugee is not doing this out of choice. He's been forced to flee because if he or she fears for his life. And if we look at it through the lens, and I'm a rights perspective person, so if you look at it through the lens of just a basic human dignity, then the refugee has the right, the principle of non-refoulement, to first at least put a foot in, to step in, you know, and look at the world community to help it as much as it can. And I think so today, all our laws, all our international legal frameworks are really failing. And we need to look at first the first responders, the first help. That really needs to be looked at. Just from the lens of human rights, of the right to life, simply, you know.
Right, right. You're right. So, no, absolutely, absolutely. Now, if I could just ask you, a final question, and this has to do perhaps with, the students who would be thinking of doing research projects in the area of refugee studies. Given that you have this rich empirical experience of doing this work across various sites, what is key some of the key points that you might want to share with students who are embarking in this area of research and practice? I think so. What's coming up, in fact, I had a fascinating PhD thesis submitted by a student of mine. She looked at the narratives of women refugees in three states. She looked at, Rohingya refugees, women. She looked at Tibetan women refugees. And I think so. The third was Afghan Sikh refugees. Oh, she looked at Pakistani Hindus. She went and did field work in the camps in Rajasthan. And we have to look at the intersection of the living condition and what is the legal perspective. So why? And we have a new law coming up in India. I think so. More and more students, and even us as academics, we need to be examining how that law is going to play out, and whether it's going to mark more refugees and make them lose their rights that they sometimes do have under the silence of ignominy that they kind of get away, rather than now being marked out. And increasingly, we are seeing that how the UNHCR cards with the recent deportations, even they don't work, they don't help them. So, the intersection of human rights and law with various refugee groups, wherever they are. We saw how a few years ago with the NRC in Assam, overnight 4 million people became stateless who are Indian citizens. Okay, many of them could have been people who've come from the neighboring states or the countries,
but still how the category of citizens and, outsiders and refugees kind of intermingles. More than anything else today, I somehow feel that, from a very humanistic and ethnographic perspective also, and anthropological and sociological, this whole hate that has come towards the outsider within societies, within our drawing rooms, within our classrooms, within our homes, within our political parties, our social spaces, right? Why can't we just even let them be? Why should we cleanse our lands of these people who have nowhere else to go? Like, what are they taking away from us? What are we getting more by throwing them out? And this has led to so much of hate mongering against a group of people who definitely, more than anything else, deserve more rights than they're getting.
Thanks, Priyanka, for that, very inspiring lecture, really. And we are grateful to you for your time and that you took it out and you spent it on this class. Thank you so much.